Good morning to the Culture, Leisure and Sport decision meeting on the 8th of December 2017. Good morning everyone, welcome. I'm Councillor Linda Symes, Cabinet Member for Culture, Leisure and Sport. Can I please ask members and officers to introduce themselves if I start this way?
Lisa Gallagher, Democratic Services.
Jo Daly, I'm Business Development Manager for the Directorate.
Adrian Rosier, Park Service Manager.
Claire Looney, Commissioning and Partnership Manager.
Sue Page, Finance Manager.
Councillor Steve Pitt, Lib Dem Spokesman for Culture, Leisure and Sport.
Jane Mee, Museums and Visitor Services Manager.
Dave Percival, Outreach and School Library Service Manager.
There's just some housekeeping information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at the Queen Victoria statue in front of the civic offices. In order to comply with the Portsmouth Cultural Trust Fire Marshal regulations, please remember to sign out when you leave the building after today's meeting. And may I draw everyone's attention to the fact that this meeting will be live streamed from a camera at a fixed location at the back of the meeting room, and the recording will be on the Council's website. Members of the public are also permitted to record the meeting on an understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. May I ask everyone to use the microphones provided when they are speaking? Thank you. I'd just like to say before we start, there's just one small change on item 4, the business plan. It's going to be noted there's a small change because we can't really set out a name for the a title for the service as yet, because we've got to wait for the other portfolio holders agreement. So that will be the one thing that will be different in that report. So, okay. Apologies for absence. We've received none. Declarations of interest? Nope. Okay. Parks and seafront charges. Claire Looney.
Councillor Symes, thank you. Josie's actually going to present on the overall report because it's a combination report from Josie, Adrian and myself. However, I do wish to table a change to one of the recommendations. If you recall at the briefing meeting, we were still in discussion with legal services about the ability to charge for the amenities charges for tables and chairs on the promenade. There has been quite an extensive review of both the provision of the current COLAS contract and how that operates within the PFI framework, and also with licensing, because currently licensing framework charges for amenities on highways. It would appear that the promenade falls outside of all of those types of areas. But with the legal advice we have had, what we would like to do is amend recommendation 2.23 in the report to allow us to negotiate with individual businesses on an individual basis and not have a published set of fees and charges. If it would appear that Culture, Leisure and Sport as a committee do not have the power in the way we had anticipated to charge amenities on highways because it falls outside of, or is mostly covered by licensing committee. However, it would appear that the promenade does fall outside of this, which is why it's caused us quite an angst in terms of trying to find a solution to this. If it is undertaken under the licensing committee process, they have a blanket way of dealing with it, and it's a full cost recovery service. We don't feel that's appropriate for what often will be a seasonal resource going in and out of businesses that are directly based on the promenade. Therefore, we'd like to change the recommendation in 2.23 to that the Cabinet member agrees for the introduction of amenities charges for tables and chairs on the promenade by negotiation with individual businesses. That will be a fair and transparent process. We are very happy to discuss with businesses and make sure it's comparable either with the licensing fees and charges, which are based on an area basis, anything starting at 5 metres squared going up to more than 20 metres squared, partly because the number of businesses involved in this decision will be very small. At the moment, there are probably only 2 businesses this would impact on. So therefore, we just want to make that change if that's at all possible.
Thanks very much, Claire. Claire's just been explaining a couple of changes. Steve's just joined us. I wondered if you had either any declarations of interest or anything you would like Claire to go over from the changes to the fees and charges that we're going to make for item 3 on the agenda. You don't.
As Claire mentioned, it's a joint report really. It's a little bit of me, a little bit of Adrian and a little bit of Claire. From my perspective, is the beach huts and also the poster sites. We've just taken CPI to be 3%, so if we put anything up by 3%, basically it's staying the same. There's no difference there. In the annual huts, we've only increased by 3%, so they've remained the same. We've introduced a shoulder charging this year to the weekly huts to try and maximise the income, because it wasn't quite maximised this year, although there was a huge improvement. And also we have, just for the weekly huts, not the annuals, we've taken out a wider geographical area to PO10, just in the hope that they will all be utilised. The more they're utilised, the more people go down, the more they support the businesses and the economy down there. The charge that we introduced last year on the low season has really been quite successful. So we've we've had people down there in the winter, which is great, and we've had something like 40% booking down there, which means there's more people down there, which makes it a little bit safer as well. And so we're really pleased with that, and we've increased that a little bit too. They're sort of my charges, really. I don't know if Adrian wants to say something on his areas.
Again, for parks, really just to highlight the changes that are any different to CPI inflation. On parks site hire fees, we've changed the deposit in line with the seafront charges. And for Great Saltons Golf Course, on the flexi season ticket prices, we haven't changed those since April 2015, so we're proposing to raise those by £20 each, and introduce a new 11-hole green fee that would attract greater play during the week in the winter months.
Okay, sorry. I think the report is great. I think it's good that we're hiring the seafront more. The huts are going better. We have to hope that in the future we'll be able to provide some new and better huts down there. The last time we had a terrible problem with Historic England, so we'll have to tread a bit more carefully. But I think that it would be great to try and expand our sun hut offer, because I think it would make a huge improvement to our seafront. When you see how many other cities have dozens and dozens of them, and they're so successful, and they make so much money for their own service. With cuts going where they are, I think we need to do everything we can, and I think you're all working really hard. Thank you very much. Okay, agenda item 4. Josie.
This is regarding the business plan. The business plan for the Directorate was presented at briefing. And the business plan is not just about the objectives, it's also an introduction to the service. We haven't got an introduction to the service other than the business plan. So that's why it tends to be a bit meaty at the front, because it explains about all the services. We use it for new staff, we use it for new members, we use it for bids, we use it for all kinds of things. Then there's the objectives, the challenges and the KPIs. We had some really interesting feedback from members at briefing. And I'd like to just go through a couple of those things, if I may. One of them was that the service is quite big, and therefore there was a list of services at the back, and members felt that we could do with a little bit more meat on the bone there to have some kind of visual or aid memoir. So what I've done is on the second page, just behind the plan, we've put a list of the services, and we've put underneath the key areas of work, which I hope would help somebody at first glance, and we found it really useful ourselves actually to do that. So it's a little bit small. I didn't know, Councillor Symes, if you wanted me to give out a bit of a larger version. It's up to you if you can read it.
Well,
Shall
I can read it, but it is no, I can read this one. I can read this one. Yes. When the plan goes out, will this be slightly larger though, or not? Or do you think it's impossible to make it any bigger than that? But no, I think that was a good idea. Steve, your idea, Steve, wasn't it? I think that was quite. Oh, it was yours. Yes. Sorry, Steve.
Yes, I mean, I tried. I would like to put it at the front, and that's the reason why it's smaller. If it goes at the back, it has to go. If it goes bigger, it has to go as an appendices at the back. So, if you wish, we could take it off the back of that page too, and we could make it into a larger appendices. But I think members at the briefing mentioned that they'd like it at the front.
Yeah, because it's the first thing you see.
Yeah.
And then anything you want to find from therein, it's clear where you'd have to look to find that particular thing,
Yeah.
isn't it?
So that was the first feedback. The second feedback was that although outcomes were threaded through the plan, there wasn't any one place where they were. So I've managed to, without making the plan too much bigger, on the plan on a page at the back, we've done like a ticker tape of key outcomes. So, for example, we build cohesive communities, we create improve public realm, we improve informal and formal learning and development, we encourage, culture-led regeneration. All those things, I think, is really useful just to put as a flash, sort of a soundbite at the back on page 40. And the third thing members said in relation to this was about case studies. And funnily enough, we've started to work on that already, because that's really an important part of performance management, is to make everything come alive by personal stories about how culture changes people's lives. And we've already had a piece of work done, which we'll do over the next 2 to 3 months, linked to key outcomes, where we'll be doing case studies right across the directorate. This will be threaded through funding bids, and also it will be put in presentations, and also part of the business plan next year. It's quite a big piece of work if you really want it to work well. We've got bits and bobs of case studies all over, but it's basically pulling all that together and making it really meaningful for the public. So that's what we plan to do, and I think that's really good feedback, and we hope to put that in next year.
I think the problem is no one wants to have an information overload. So, because we need something that people will actually want to read and look at and find useful. And I'm not saying that this isn't any of those things, but I understand what you said by expanding it. Every time you expand it a bit, there's a bit more for people to read. It will be easier to know which parts you want to read if you have this at the front. But I think we just have to be really careful in the future that we don't make it a document that people don't actually read, because there are a lot of those. And this has some really interesting stuff in it. Thank you. Stephen.
Yeah, I just wanted to commend officers for the work they've done on the business plan. I think it's excellent, and it just really demonstrates the array of services that the department offers. I really like the addition of the plan on a page. I can just imagine that on a wall now in the office so that people can refer to it. Could you say a bit more about risk? So there's a good section in here on risk, but what would you say is the biggest risk affecting the department, and what are you doing to mitigate against it?
Well, with risks, it is quite difficult in that, we have such an array of services, and, I think from a corporate perspective, what they're trying to do is to give us an idea of, rather than have a generic risk, such as, obviously cuts impact on services and resources, and we might not have any services to deliver eventually down the road, or, deterioration of buildings. What they're really after is service risks that really impact per service, and that's what I've tried to do in this risk register. We used to have very generic risks, and now we've gone to more service risks. So it's very difficult to say what the key risk is, because I think our services, you've got culture and then you've got regulatory services, and they've got very different risks. But clearly for us, the risk is that we've got all these ambitions and commitments, and we just hope that we've got the service, the resources to deliver them. And I think that would be, if I asked it about related to the business plan, I would think that would be the key thing for me, is that we have all this ambition, we could do so much for the city, and we just hope that we have those resources to deliver.
Yeah, I think that's our worry. Our worry about all things. Our service is shrinking. Less people have got to do an awful lot more. We are trying to at least generate income, which we've been quite successful at. But the ongoing thing, we just had the new round of pay increases. I mean, that will place a burden of something like 1.3 million on the council every year, an extra burden, an extra amount of money to find. I'm not sure that we'll be able to find that money from generating income, as we have done in the past years. So who does that fall on then? What do you do? Do you shrink services? Do you decrease the amount of staff you've got? Nobody wants to see libraries and museums go. They're so important for the city. They're so important for the residents. But we are going to have to do some serious thinking about how we can achieve the income we need to be able to continue to have those services. The members of staff work extremely hard. They do over and above. They do weekends and all sorts of hours to make sure that the public, in this case, I think, get a really fantastic deal for their money. There's so much going on here, and it's all down to these people. So let's hope we keep on going. I'm sure we will. We'll find a way. Thank you. I can't, because of the sun, I can't see if it's on or off. It's on. Oh, it's a little light there, sorry. So now we're obviously going to item 5, which is Victoria Park. Adrian.
Thank you, Councillor Symes. So yes, this report is really just to summarise the work we've been doing on Victoria Park with a view to submitting a bid to the Heritage Lottery Fund. It follows early engagement by Stephen Bailey and yourself with the HLF to see whether it would be well received, and following that we've been down to Dover, one of their reference sites, to see the work they had done down there and their application, and they were actually delivering the project at the time we were meeting with them. And we've actually been working with the project manager who was managing the Kearsley Park Dover site, and he's helped us with our application. And at the moment, at the round 1 stage, it's really about highlighting the areas we think we would wish to develop should we be successful and get funding for the development stage. And that's really around the monuments and memorials and those heritage aspects. It's re-establishing features of the site that are part of that historic design, recreating the tree-lined avenue to the centre of the park. And whilst there was historically a bandstand in the park, we're highlighting that there's scope for a performance space, probably towards the southwestern corner of the site. Not necessarily a bandstand, but somewhere where we could hold further events and community activities. Removing some of the redundant and derelict buildings in the centre of the site, and incorporating a hub really in the centre that can incorporate the animals, could potentially have public toilets, and would be an area we could have educational and growing activities, and that could be with schools, with groups from the local area, and volunteers. And we think that something similar to the project that we've got running down at Avenue de Caen, where we've got supported volunteers down there, there'd certainly be scope to widen that into the park and develop it there. So at the moment, we've put some costings to some outline proposals. They are based on a lot of the learning from the action plan that was undertaken a year or so ago. And we know that there was great support for enhancing the historic design of the park, better facilities for the children, return of public toilets and events. And we're not proposing to open the park 24 hours because that's neither our wish, and it didn't come through on the consultation either. So at the moment we've got a figure of around 2.5 million to do all of the work we'd like to do, and clearly that would have to be more detailed should we go through a development phase. One slight change to when the report was written, though, was the Heritage Lottery Fund withdrew the Parks for People programme last Friday without notice. So we haven't got a dedicated programme we can apply to. So there is still a funding stream which is under the Heritage Fund, and so we intend to now change the application slightly and submit to that. So that's a bit of a blow in terms of our aim, but we'd still like to make the application.
I think it's important that we also make quite clear to everybody that nothing will be decided by the council and then inflicted on anyone, that there will be a full consultation throughout the whole thing, because it's the title of the grant we were after speaks for itself. It's Parks for the People, and the people have to be tantamount importance. I think one of the reasons why we would definitely keep the park closed at night will be the animals. There is no way we will want people in that park with animals at night. And the only reason that the animals would be moved would be if the performance space, if there were going to be anything noisy at all, we would need to make sure that we protected those animals as best as possible. It might mean having baffles that we keep to one side and then use on these occasions so they're further supported. But, you know, before someone says, oh, it's all been decided and the council are just going to inflict this, they're not. Everyone will be asked, and the Friends of the Rock Gardens prove the point. You can get a really successful group of people going in and helping on a regular basis, and it brings the whole place to life. It's just wonderful. I mean, so I hope the same will be true of Victoria Park, and yes, we will be hopefully having another garden centre down there because the one on Avenue de Caen has proved very successful. Okay, Stephen.
Just 3 points, if I may. In light of the Guildhall's ambitions and interest in seeking capital improvement funding, I wondered if there's a broader piece of work that could be done to connect up their ambitions with Victoria Park. My second point was just to reiterate my support for using community infrastructure levy funding for the project when appropriate to do so. And the third point was just to reiterate the importance of this being a project that's done with the community and not at the community, because it's really important that we've got community ownership over any improvements that are made.
Thank you, Linda. Just a couple of things, Adrian. You referenced the earlier consultation that took place. I'm not aware that that's actually been published. Is it going to be? I know a number of members of the public, including some that Councillor Symes will know quite well, have pressed to say that consultation took place and we were told that it would inform the next stage, but I'm not aware that it's ever actually been put out in the public domain. And as I said in the briefing meeting, we did a similar consultation as well, and I've made those responses available to you. But I think it's quite important that as we go forward, in order to demonstrate the fact that consultations are meaningful, we need to think about publishing that earlier consultation. And I know it has nothing to do with officers present here, and it was part of a different process. So, no reflection on anyone in the room at all. But in order for people to understand what the process is, I think publishing that earlier consultation will say, this is what you've told us already, now we're going to drill down on some more specific issues that we want you, the public, to respond to. Now we're developing that plan, and it makes the process clear, whereas if the earlier plan's never published, people just say, well, why not, and why are we doing another consultation when there's been one? And I think helping the public to understand that process is quite important. And the other thing that I wanted to mention was, with regard to the recent work that's taken place on the lodge, there was some quite major works done there in terms of the visual aspect of that building, and I just wondered whether, and again, I know it wasn't necessarily anything to do with this process, which is frustrating, but if we're bidding for a Heritage Lottery Fund, were any of those works that were carried out to the original fabric of the building, especially with the garden wall being removed, are any of those a threat to potential for this bid going forward?
I don't know the answer to that at the moment. I think if we do get to the development phase, then we would have to get Heritage Art, a design team involved, and look at the conservation work that we're required to do. And if we're doing further buildings, we'd have to have a conservation plan, etc. So I think that's certainly something that would need to be looked at in terms of whether there was anything that we may need to see if we could either amend or incorporate within the lodge, but at the moment I wouldn't be able to say whether there's anything of the previous works that would compromise our aims of this project.
I think it's out of our remit because this is obviously a pred holding. It's not held by Culture and Leisure, so I think really your questions will be best directed at the portfolio holder for that service, because they will have all the information you require, which we will have to go and look for. So I think it's probably best if you approach that directorate. Sorry. I think it's a great thing to do. I think that park has been there since 1878. It's going to become a hub for an awful lot more people. And I think we're very lucky to have this nice green lung in the centre of our city. And I think in all working together, we can come up with a great park that will maybe last another 100 or so years before anyone has to change it. So I'm very happy about it, and I think it's great to see how much things are moving on in the city and not being held back by anyone. We all seem to be working in the same direction, which is fantastic. So thank you very much. Okay. Right. On to item 6.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Since the briefing meeting, I've been able to update the national statistics participation with the Reading Challenge. So I can confirm that this year, nearly 735,000 children took part nationally in 97% of public libraries. And in Portsmouth this year, we've had our highest ever number of children complete, which is just over 1,600 children, with 3,000 children signing up. And that's completion rate is fairly typical for us, and indeed reflects a national trend. Since 2008, that number of successful completers has gone up by 113%. So it's year on year going from strength to strength. It represents a huge piece of work for the Library and Archives Service, with over 50,000 items, 52,000 items issued to children over a kind of 12-week period. So at every level of staff, from stock acquisition to frontline, our volunteer support, everybody is engaged, and we really think the sort of promotional work we've undertaken this year has really paid off. But of course, we want to increase participation every year, and we do manage to get in virtually all the schools, but there are still things we can do, I think. Would like to mention the support of our young people, older young people in the city, who also supported library staff in volunteering. So we had over 40 young people delivering over 720 hours of volunteer support during the summer holidays. And I can also reveal that since the briefing meeting, that the theme next year will be based around the Beano, which celebrates its 80th anniversary. So the theme of the challenge will be Mischief Makers, and children will receive a fold-out map of Beano Town, and they can follow Dennis and Nasha and pick up incentives along the way. So that's the Summer Reading Challenge for this year, and we will continue to seek to increase pupil participation.
That's fantastic. Is there ever any feedback from the schools to say what improvement have been noticed in children who've actually taken part? You know, you would expect, if you stop reading over the summer, we all know that your reading skills deteriorate when you start again at school. If you've taken part in a challenge like that, surely there's some benchmark for saying, you know, these children, may not a percentage, but these children have improved considerably by keeping up their reading skills during the summer. I mean, we know it happens.
The feedback I've received, it's generally anecdotal.
Yeah.
There is, I think, an issue nationally around evidence-based for the Reading Challenge. I think the last big piece of research was in 2010 about the impact on literacy attainment, and I think it is something that they're looking into developing over the next few years.
Yeah, I wonder if you could just say a bit more about how the programme's reached particularly hard-to-reach communities.
Yep, well, we offer, it's a universal offer, and library staff, as I said, there were just 3 primary schools that we didn't get into this year. And schools are actually quite good at encouraging participation, particularly through incentives in the start of the autumn term when pupils return. And they will particularly target the promotional material to certain pupils in schools. We know that that takes place. And we know from just the sheer diversity of the audience that attends the winners event at Southsea Castle that they do come from all over the city. So we have people travelling from, you know, all over to be there. And it was, again, thousands of people this year.
I was thinking more ethnicity, really, diversity.
We do collate that equalities information, and there is relatively high participation rates, I think, among BME groups in the city.
Yeah, I noticed that when I went to the, you haven't turned your mic off a second. You can't both speak together, I'm afraid. I've noticed the change over the last 2 or 3 years when I've been doing it, of the numbers of children and the confidence of them, and also the wide range of groups they come from. And the whole families who participate. So you've had brother and sister doing it the year before, and the younger brother does it this year. And they're all really pleased to be there and get their medal. So I think it's a fantastically successful programme, and I think you do it amazingly. Well done.
I'll just thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Just congratulations on the work that you're doing on this. I think it's amazing, and it's great to see it growing year on year. Like Stephen, obviously there's always concerns about those harder to reach communities, but hopefully, I think the presentation event is key in itself. Is that if those children from less advantaged backgrounds see that they're mixing with a whole wide variety of different children, that in itself should inspire them to think that, you know, they're not disadvantaged in that way and their opportunities can be the same. So I think that event being the focal point is very helpful in that respect. And you know, you could dedicate an entire team of people full time to developing that with those hubs, but the resources are stretched, and I think the job that you're doing with the resources that you've got available is to be commended, and thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Symes. So just to remind everyone who, if you don't know already, this is a £5 million 5-year project that will be completed in 2021. The Heritage Lottery Fund is the main funder, and the project is very much defined by the lottery's approved purposes. I should say the museum will reopen in March 2018, but the funding for the activities and what have you goes on right the way until February 2021, although in fact we will have spent most of the money by then. I've listed all the key milestones, which is the work what we've achieved over the past 12 months, or it has been going on since 2014. And obviously we're gathering a degree of momentum now, so I can report that since the briefing meeting, the filming of the AVs is taking place in York, and I'm told that the actor delivering the French resistance woman, is amazing. She was absolutely excellent, and we felt it was something clearly very dear to her heart. So that's going really well. And also yesterday we went to see the prototype of the website, and I can see that we're going to achieve digital access to collections. They were working with a list of 200 items selected at random from the collection, and I don't know, the information, the data was shown in a very clear and elegant way, and it's very searchable. So I'm just, so it demonstrates the commitment actually the staff have had to actually making sure that the data is very well recorded, it's very clean. So anyway, that was very exciting. And I think the main thing for me, the thing I'd like to emphasise most really, you know, in this list is the work we've done with the Disability Advisory Forum. It's a group of people, the people who attend varies, but they've been really helpful in terms of commenting on some of the graphics that the exhibition designers have produced, but also helping us to think about how the interactives work, what additional material we might provide, and in what way to make this museum as accessible as possible. It won't be perfect, because sometimes what one group wants is different to what another group needs, but hopefully it will be more than a tokenistic approach. So for me that's very exciting. And of course we're now working on Landing Craft Tank. That project's now sort of live, and obviously we have a dialogue with the National Museum of the Royal Navy, and in fact we're leading on the activity plan because we will be responsible for its delivery and the running of the vessel once it opens, so that's very exciting too. And of course D-Day 75 is looming, and that's all part of our project as well.
I think the project's gone really well. We've kept to time when we can, because we lost 4 months and we're trying to recover ourselves at the moment, which seems to be going particularly well. I think the fact that all those artefacts are coming back now also makes you feel as though something's happening. And the landing tank craft, I'd love to go and see it once it's started its, you know, I mean, I think they've started some of the renovation, but not all of it yet, haven't they?
Yes, they did some work initially, and the conservation of the vessel, it's key, and I think so it's more about planning at the moment, but I think they will do some implementation before they've got the second round money actually, just to keep things going.
Has anyone else been to see it? Have you been to see the landing crane? It's amazing. It's so big. You don't expect it to be quite. Of course, it carries 10 tanks, so it's going to be big, isn't it? But you can't quite get the size of it. It was sat down the end of a shed, and it didn't look too big. But as you got closer, it got bigger and bigger, didn't it, Jane? It was enormous. Anyway, anyone got anything to say about it?
Yeah, just in terms of the shortfall then on what's left, is there anything members can do? What kind of plans do you have to try and secure that short amount of money really in terms of the grand sum of funds that you've raised.
So the responsibility for that is still sitting with the Portsmouth D-Day Museum Trust, who've been the trust has established in order to assist with the fundraising. I must admit they were very hopeful of some quite significant funding coming in, but it hasn't materialised just yet, which is a bit disappointing actually, and that would have halved that deficit. So I think fingers crossed. I think we need to start looking at the activity plan elements and fundraising for that now actually, because the building is so near to completion, but because the project goes on right the way through until 2020, 21, I think there's lots of opportunities to bring in that relatively modest amount. But obviously any donations will be gratefully received.
Yeah, I think it is a relatively small amount of money, and I think it might come in dribs and drabs, which is not the way we would have preferred it to happen. We'd like to know it was secure there and we didn't have to worry about it. But I think in the great scheme of things, the amount of money that's been found and invested is fantastic. And I'm sure the Trust will do their very best to endeavour that that final bit of money comes in. But thank you very much for the offer of the assistance.
Thank you, Councillor Symes. So, yeah, this year we wanted to try a different approach to our In Bloom campaign, and given that we know there's been a decline in butterflies nationwide, particularly in urban areas, and that wildflower planting has proved very popular elsewhere in the country, we wanted to increase the amount of areas that we had sown these. Previously, we'd trialled it in a couple of parks, and we were looking really at open space, green space that was outside of parks, if you like, because they generally will have some floral features or borders, and it was trying to pick up on sites that people pass, either walking or driving on their journeys to work, just to introduce not only some colour but also increasing the pollinator, the opportunity for the pollinators to survive on. So we've with the budget we had available, we've done about 10 sites in the city and offered it to schools as well. And this was really just to document the learning and the outcomes this year. There's some photos from some of the sites, and our plans for next year would be to replicate this in the majority of those sites, and if we can attract some further sponsorship, we'd like to add it to further sites. Clearly, a lot of the roadside verges are within the PFI, but there are still some green space that we would look to target. So, yeah.
I think that's another project well done. You know, those roadside verges, especially down Queen Street, looked absolutely fantastic, and it lasted so much longer. I know at Clarence Park, just on Clarendon Road, in late October, there were still flowers, you know, and you think it's astonishing. I know we had a bit of good weather as well to help it, but I think on the whole, they proved an enormous success, and I think it's much better than a one-off celebration of a front garden or a hotel front. I think it's a much better way of doing things. And, you know, I hope long may we continue to do so. I'm sure that once people realise that they can sponsor it, because I think it's done rather quickly last year, it was a late decision. But I think once people realise they can sponsor it, I'm sure there will be people. Garden centres, perhaps, you know, you could put a little flag. Or would you have to pay business rates on that? I'm not sure. But those will be the sort of people to target, wouldn't it, to actually show how lovely some of the plants can look. Anyway, Stephen, no? Pete? Okay. All right. Well, thank you very much. I think that brings our meeting to a conclusion today. Thank you all for coming. And if I don't see you before, have a nice Christmas. If I don't see you again, have a nice... Oh, I will, Tuesday. Yeah. Okay. No, thank you. I sent you over some photos. Did you see them?